Hi, this is Sandra Harley, and I am here to share with you some basics of dyslexia. Not last summer, but the summer before, I spent quite a bit of time taking a lot of coursework through the International Dyslexia Association, and then also reading the text titled Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. And so taking all this new knowledge and synthesizing it into some basics around dyslexia will be what this presentation is it's where all the content of this presentation is coming from. And so with that, there will be 3 learning targets. Once this course is done, you will be able to identify characteristics of struggling readers and/or students with dyslexia. You will be able to identify resources that Edina Schools has provided for teachers to support students with markers of dyslexia and/or struggling readers. And last, you will be able to respond in a formal and professional way to parents with dyslexia concerns. So take a minute and think about your elementary literacy experiences and learning to read. What kind of struggles did you have as you were going through the reading process, and what did those challenges look like? What were your strengths? So just take a minute to think about those. Characteristics of struggling readers. So I'd like you to take a moment to think about some challenges that students face when they are learning to read. For example, are they challenged with fluency? Is it a comprehension challenge? Are students struggling with decoding words and the phonics piece? So think a second about what those characteristics of struggling readers might look like. Dyslexia is a term. DYS is the prefix meaning lack of ability, and then lexia meaning with language. So dyslexia simply means the lack of ability with language. When I was taking my coursework through the International Dyslexia Association, this definition of dyslexia was presented to me in chunks, and so it made it a lot easier for me to understand this definition because it is lengthy, it's cumbersome, and there's a lot of components of it. So I'm going to do the same for you in this presentation. On the next few slides, I'm going to break this definition down. But before that, I'm going to go ahead and read this definition. Dyslexia means a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent recognition of words and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. Now, this is a key piece to this definition, and I'm going to reread that part. It results from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relationship to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Now, this is the definition on the Minnesota Department of Ed's website, and I have that statute attached to this link below. So if we're looking at the very first sentence within this definition, it says, dyslexia means a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. So if we're thinking about that word neurological is the makeup of the brain. Okay, it is not a result of a student getting a head injury. It's not a degenerative disease. It's not a vision problem or a hearing problem. It is the makeup of the brain. It is how the brain is established when that individual is born. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent recognition of words and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So if we're looking at that part in yellow, basically what they're saying there is that students are having a lot of difficulties breaking words down to the point that they can read and spell them. And so if we're looking at this visual, think about an intermediate student and they're looking at the word specific. They see that word, but they read it Pacific. That is a perfect example of how a student has having trouble breaking down those word parts so that they can read them. And I've even seen this in a lot of adults. That would be adults with markers of dyslexia. Okay, so the second part of this definition basically says these difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language, meaning the brain has difficulty processing the sounds and then also the order of sounds in words. That is often unexpected in relationship to other cognitive abilities. What they're saying here is that students with markers of dyslexia typically have between an average to an above average intelligence. It is not the result of a low IQ. Now, this was information for me, and it's also information if we're thinking about the characteristics of struggling readers. This is kind of a discrepancy, whereas struggling readers, they have a lot of the same symptoms of dyslexia that a struggling reader would have. But at the same time, a student with dyslexia typically is in that average to above average range, meaning of intelligence, meaning they have a lot of strengths as well. And the provision of effective classroom instruction is basically saying that the student that has markers of dyslexia has had the same opportunity to learn in the same environment that other students were successful in, and maybe they were not successful. If we're looking at the visual here in the lower right corner, this is the brain of a dyslexic reader, and this is a brain of an efficient reader. Okay, so you can see in this diagram that the dyslexic reader is it's the forefront of the brain, right? That's really highlighted here, meaning a lot of their focus is right here, whereas an efficient reader is able to focus both at the frontal part of the brain and the back of the brain. Okay, and so there's neural pathways that connect these two that are efficient in a non-dyslexic reader. But when you're looking at a dyslexic reader, those neural pathways to the back of the brain have not yet been developed. And so that is a key piece to a dyslexic reader and an efficient reader, is those neural pathways have not yet been established. Okay, so this is the last part of the definition, and it reads, secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So for thinking about the very first part of this sentence that says secondary consequences, I think we can kind of figure out what that means. And if we're looking at these pillars of reading or elements of reading, we know as teachers that phonemic awareness and phonics instruction has to be really solid in order for students to read fluently, develop the vocabulary that's necessary, and then ultimately comprehend text. So secondary consequences, meaning if students can't develop their phonological awareness or phonics, and they don't have that solid, and that phonological component is not yet established, there will be, as a result, secondary consequences, meaning, hey, the individual may not be able to read fluently or comprehend text. Impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. The very last part of this definition basically is saying, and we know as teachers, again, that limited reading negatively impacts vocabulary development and or background knowledge. Students that have limited reading abilities, there's a gap there, right, that widens as students venture through the grade levels. They're not as far along as their peers with their vocabulary and their background knowledge. And so that is the last part of the definition, just basically stating how it impedes the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So that was a lot in that definition, and I hope it helps to have it broke down. I know it helped for me to understand dyslexia a little bit clearer. So we talked about the strengths of dyslexic students, and there are several strengths, and these are just a few of them. Dyslexic students are often described as creative, innovative thinkers, large vocabulary and reasoning skills in the average to above average range. Many of these students think out of the box. They come up with novel solutions to problems and are hands-on learners. They can have a high vocabulary, they can be highly verbal, and they have average to advanced oral language expression. And so thinking about my advanced academic reading classes, I've had students in my gifted classrooms that were identified as gifted students that were dyslexic, or maybe they also had dysgraphia. And so just an important thing to note that there are a lot of strengths, and these students that I had in my classroom were extremely imaginative and creative and could think at extremely deep levels. And so just reinforcing the fact that there's a lot of strengths. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions around dyslexia. For example, dyslexia is not reading or writing letters or words backwards. Dyslexia is not caused by poor eyesight, vision processing problems, or hearing problems. Remember, in the definition, it states that dyslexia is neurological in origin. And again, that means it is the makeup of the brain of an individual. Dyslexia is not an intellectual or developmental disability. Gifted students can have dyslexia. Students with markers of dyslexia are often capable or gifted in many areas. And you will see that I listed some of these areas here on this slide deck. Students with dyslexia are usually working harder than their peers in your classrooms. This is not at all a lack of motivation. That is another misconception. Dyslexia is not due to either lack of intelligence or desire to learn. With appropriate teaching methods, students with dyslexia can learn successfully. Dyslexia can range between mild all the way to profound. That's why I use the term markers of dyslexia, because there is a range. These are some common symptoms of students with markers of dyslexia. They have difficulty learning to read, to spell, and learning the alphabet. They have difficulty with rhyming and also the syllables and words. And dyslexia can be identified before kindergarten. Difficulty with phonemic awareness, hearing and manipulating sounds and words, and then also with the auditory component of having difficulty with the different sounds in words. These are some of the common symptoms of dyslexia as well. Students with dyslexia will tend to misread or omit common small words. So if you're thinking about or looking at the sentence below where it says, Lucy is going to the park and she's taking the dog for a walk. The words that are in yellow, those are the small words, common small words that students with dyslexia could easily misread because in a lot of cases, they are not decodable phonetic, right? And so students will tend to misread them or they omit them entirely. Students with dyslexia stumble through longer words. They can stumble through longer words. They could have poor reading comprehension when they're reading orally or silently. However, if there's an adult or someone else reading to them a book, They could have really, really high levels of comprehension. Students with dyslexia can have slow, laborious oral reading. And again, this varies, right? We want to always keep in mind that it varies. Markers of dyslexia or symptoms vary from mild all the way to profound. Difficulty in learning the sounds of letters, remembering names and or shapes of letters, reverses letters or the order of letters when reading after the first grade. We know that in kindergarten and first grade that it is a developmental piece when students are reversing their letters or the order of their letters. But once first grade has ended and the student or the individual is still doing this, it's a symptom. It doesn't categorically mean that a student has dyslexia. It is a symptom for some students with dyslexia. Students with dyslexia can be highly verbal with a large vocabulary, but this might not be evident in their written work. Important points about symptoms. Each symptom can range between mild, moderate, severe, and profound. Someone with dyslexia will have some of the symptoms, but not necessarily all of the symptoms, and that's an important piece to recognize. No two individuals with dyslexia will present with the same exact symptoms, with the same exact degree of difficulty in those symptoms. Many people, as many as 15 to 20% of the population as a whole, have some of the symptoms of dyslexia, including slow or inaccurate reading, poor spelling, poor writing, or mixing up similar words. And this is a quote from the International Dyslexia Association. So if you are a classroom teacher, chances are you have a small amount of students in your classroom that have symptoms of dyslexia. Dyslexia runs in families. So if you're in a conference with a family member and they share with you that they had dyslexia or they have a sister with dyslexia, that is something to pay attention to because like I said, parents with dyslexia are likely to have children with dyslexia. It can be identified early as preschool, and even when young kids just start learning how to talk and they have a delayed speech, those are also symptoms. So it can be identified early, especially if those symptoms are profound. But for other students that may have milder markers of dyslexia, it can go unidentified until they get older. Dyslexia and special education. Now, this was information for me. I did not realize this, but a child may not qualify for special education, but may still meet criteria for a diagnosis of dyslexia. Schools do not make a diagnosis of dyslexia, nor do schools determine that a student does not have dyslexia, right? It can only be diagnosed by a licensed psychologist. However, schools can identify characteristics of dyslexia through screening tools and assessments. So we can identify as a school district and elementary schools can say, you know what, I'm seeing some characteristics of dyslexia. I'm looking at my FAST bridge, I'm looking at my diagnostic, and I'm seeing some symptoms or characteristics. But you can never, ever diagnose. But you can, like I said, identify with those characteristics. Regardless of the diagnosis, schools can effectively address the needs of students through explicit, systematic, and evidence-based instruction through a continuum of supports or multi-tiered systems of services. And so with that, I would just like to emphasize that the resources that Edina has provided for our teachers, Being a Reader, Sunday Essentials, those resources are research-based, they are explicit, they are systematic, and they are evidence-based. Okay, and so that's how we can support our students with characteristics of dyslexia and struggling students, frankly, any student that's struggling and even the students that are not struggling, right? These resources work for all of our students. Everyone benefits. And so MDE, informational papers and guidance, this is a link down here below that you can click on if you want to get some more information about dyslexia and SPED. What does Edina Public Schools do to support students with dyslexia? These are tiers of support, and at the tier 1, which is your core instruction, classroom teachers use the Being a Reader curriculum with all learners. Universal screeners are used to identify students that are not meeting those grade level expectations, and we use FastBridge for our universal screener. And then as teachers, we know that we are providing all of our students high quality classroom instruction, and we are constantly and actively monitoring student performance. At that tier 2 level, this is a supplemental support, and tier 1 teachers can also provide tier 2 support and should be providing tier 2 support. Students not making adequate progress in tier 1 are provided a more intensive intervention at their instructional level. This could be provided through Sunday, right? Leveled literacy intervention, in addition to tier 1 instruction and support. Reading interventionists progress monitor student progress. So we've also got some supports at that tier 2 level to collaborate with the teachers and make sure that they're piggybacking off of the supports that the teachers are giving in the classroom so that they can further support that work and individual student needs. Tier 3 is our most intensive individualized level of instruction. So if students are not making adequate progress with core instruction or tier 1, and then they're also getting that tier 2 instruction, then they are at tier 3. Like I said, this is intensive individualized intervention. And what we have to support that is HillRap in Sunday 1 and Sunday 2. Reading interventionists progress monitor student progress. All of these resources that we spoke about are research-based resources. Used within all tiers are the Being a Reader, Sunday Essentials, Sunday 1, Sunday 2, HillRap, Leveled Literacy Intervention, and Words Their Way. Screening measures are used, they are in place to identify students that may have characteristics of dyslexia, and FastBridge is our screening tool. We also have the benchmark assessment system, and then the active progress monitoring within all tiers consists of FAST. We have Sunday mastery checks built into Sunday Essentials. We have HillRap, Being a Reader. We often will use reading running records through the benchmark assessment system, along with some of those optional assessments as well. And so those are all valuable pieces, and everyone benefits from these resources, right? So if you have a classroom and you're doing Sunday Essentials every single day for 15 to 20 minutes, you have students with dyslexia that are benefiting, you have your struggling readers that are benefiting, and you have the students that are not struggling and non-dyslexic students that are also benefiting from this instruction. This is a sample of a script, and this is available on the Minnesota Department of Education's website. This is a two-component script. So if I click here, you have your follow-up script. And if I go back, this is the sample script. For example, if you have a parent or guardian that's concerned, it says here, I am concerned because I think my child might have dyslexia. This is a response that you can share with the parent or guardian. Okay, you just want to fill in this blank here. Let's take a look at your child's performance, right? You might want to elaborate on that. And then maybe thinking about next steps and getting back to the parent, this could be your follow-up script. So we always want to go back to the data, right? Based on this data, your child's demonstrating difficulties in the following areas. right? And so you want to look at those diagnostics and really pinpoint where is the breakdown? What characteristics are you seeing from your diagnostics and your screening measures? Here is the instruction being provided in the classroom to address your child's area of difficulty. So what are we doing in the classroom? Right? Are we working with a second grade student with an additional support of Sunday essentials? Right? So that's where you would put this piece. Based on your child's screening assessment scores, we will also provide the following reading intervention services, right? So this could be, oh, are we getting some additional tiers of support? Are we not? Who's doing the progress monitoring on this? When is that progress monitoring happening? And what tool are you using to measure the following skills, right? And then maybe an update on their on your student or their child's progress. And so this is also, again, on the Minnesota Department of Ed's website. And so just a support for you, I would recommend that you copy and paste both pieces to this. And again, I'm going to go back. This is the response to a concerned parent or guardian. So you might want to copy this, put it on a Google Doc, and then also the follow-up. Right? Copy this and put it on a Google Doc as well, so that when you get that phone call, or maybe you get that email from a parent, you want to say, oh, hey, here is some scripting. Here's a way I can respond in a formal and professional way, so that you're not digging through slide decks trying to find this information. Just something a little bit easier. So if we can look at some different resources here. And so I added an indicator checklist. And so if you have a student, you've given a diagnostic on, you're seeing a lot of things that you're concerned about, this could be a piece that you look through, checking off boxes and really, really getting clear on what characteristics of dyslexia you're seeing with students. And so there's some pieces under oral language development, late learning to talk. Right? That could be a characteristic of a student, difficulty pronouncing words. We have some under the heading of reading, right? Go ahead and check mark the ones that you're seeing. You want to make sure that you're very precise as well. Here's the written language component, and then other common symptoms that occur with dyslexia. So if you've got some students with characteristics of dyslexia and you want to really take a closer dive or a look at this, a deeper dive and a closer look, then this is your piece of information to help support that. Here's your scripting for parents. This takes us right to the Minnesota Department of Ed's website. So again, you have the scripting on that slide. I would copy and paste it into a Google Doc, but you also have some additional information on the Department of Ed's website if you want to, again, look at that in more depth. This here is what we are calling a dyslexia one-pager. This one-pager has recently been approved and is sent out to a print shop for the purpose of informing teachers of all of the strengths of dyslexic students. It's got the definition here of dyslexia. Again, that comes right from the Minnesota Department of Ed's website. Formal testing is the only way to confirm a diagnosis of suspected dyslexia. This is not the school. It's not the school psychologist. It is a licensed psychologist. So then we have the strengths, some of the strengths. We know there's a lot of dyslexic readers, and then some common look-fors in the area of family history. And then we get into some characteristics. For example, students may demonstrate a delayed language or poor articulation skills. They may have difficulty expressing ideas clearly or speech development, right? And so those could be some earlier signs. And so again, may demonstrate. They also may not demonstrate some of these things. That's why we always use the term markers of dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia. And then it gets into the phonemic awareness category, decoding category, and then there's some look-fors in spelling and writing as well. This is some critical core intervention strategies, right? And so this is specific to a teacher working with dyslexic readers. And again, I can't emphasize enough how the resources that Edina has provided are systematic, sequential, and explicit. They have the Orton-Gillingham approach embedded in them. And again, the Orton-Gillingham is an approach, and it is built into these resources. And then, of course, your multisensory pieces, which are critical. We always want to promote the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile components. And this is also built into the resources, and these could include things like finger tapping using your arm to tap out sounds, using manipulatives and Alconin boxes to do some blending and segmenting. You can even use the letters for the visual component. And then to read and spell words, children have to sequentially encode or input visual images of words into working memory in a way that corresponds with phonological units. So that's another strategy. Allow time for processing and provide repetition until the student demonstrates fluency. This is really great news here, and I love this piece. It says research supports that after 100 hours of appropriate instruction, that there will be evidence of new neural connections in the brain. So think about the dyslexic brain and the efficient reader brain, and we talked about those neural pathways extending from the frontal part of the brain to the back of the brain. And so with 100 hours of appropriate instruction, those neural pathways will develop. Students with dyslexia can learn to read. Okay, so if you have a student or students in your classroom that maybe you're like, wow, they're just not getting it, it really has to be repeated. That instruction has to be repetitious, and students have to have the time. They have to have a lot of practice. So that's important information. Document. At least 2 pre-referral interventions must be tried and documented before you take this to your problem-solving team. Okay, and so there's some ideas on things to document. And then when do I, as a teacher, access Tier 2 support? Once you have been progress monitoring your student, and you've been doing this for 6 or 8 weeks of progress monitoring and providing intervention strategies, and there is no progress. Just make sure you're documenting, and then you would go ahead and go to your building problem-solving team at this point and say, hey, we need to have a conversation around this. Okay, so again, this is a one-pager. It will be printed on cardstock in color, front and back, for teachers to keep readily available when they are in their reading groups and reading with students that may have characteristics of dyslexia. Okay. So, exit slips. In Schoology, I would like for you to provide a reflection on what new learnings will stick with you from this session, what questions are on your mind now that the session is over, and always, please reach out to one of us if you need additional support or information on dyslexia. Just make sure that you've got your name. I know we don't have an exit slip for this course, but you can certainly put that in Schoology as part of your reflection, and then we can follow up with you individually. And so this completes your reading preparation licensure requirement for renewal. You just need to go ahead and complete that reflection component in Schoology. And again, this will complete that requirement. Again, please let us know if you have any additional questions. Thank you.